introduction for me. And if you're not aware of the University Policy Engagement Network, we're set up in 2018. The idea of being a kind of voluntary-led organisation that looks at and supports kind of knowledge brokers and knowledge brokerage and mobilisation between kind of higher education establishments and kind of academic and research focused organisations and policymakers and civic actors to understand how we do that. At the moment, the network's feels like it's bigger than that, Laura, than 110. But we've got 6 subcommittees looking at a whole range of different topics, 6 vice chairs, which represent the kind of broadest and kind of breadth and depth of who UPEN is across all the devolved administrations and across England as well. So we've got a regional and devolved subcommittee. Laura, who's on the call, is involved in an arts and humanities subcommittee. We've got an EDI subcommittee and professional development subcommittee, and there's one more that's slipping out of my mind that I can't remember. I want to say it's events or comms, but we're basically looking at how we can evolve and develop and support policy engagement between academics and other people in the best way possible. Obviously, we're here because of the areas of research interest. Hopefully you know a little bit about what those are, which is what you've signed up to come. But effectively, this is made up of knowledge brokers and academics who are interested in these areas for research interest. So this idea of hosting and sharing research questions that organizations kind of want answers for, and reaching into universities and other research kind of intensive organizations to look at how you might solve those, how you might understand them. So this event obviously is focusing on one particular one, but it's really about understanding the best way of doing that, looking at leading practice where other people are doing it, and bringing those people together to kind of promote and share and showcase it. So that's kind of what we do. I'm one of the co-chairs. We've got 2 other co-chairs and a membership of just over 30 other interested people who sit on that subcommittee. We met in person just at the start of September, so we've got a busy work package of things that we're doing and engaging with. And obviously, if you've got questions or asks of us as a group, then please feel free to get in touch with me or the other co-chairs. And all our details are on the UPEN website. So for today, obviously we've got that welcome. We're going to hear from Ed, who's going to talk about the Office for Statistical Regulation. Sophia, who's on the call as well, is going to talk about the ARIs that OSR has done. We're going to hear about some examples of those from Kyle. We're going to have a little bit of a break to stretch your legs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to engage with ARIs more broadly. And then Sophie's going to talk about working with OSR. And then we've got a chance for questions. So without further ado, I'm going to head over to Ed, Director General for the Office for Statistical Regulation, who's going to talk you through that. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Rich, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm Ed Humferson. I'm head of OSR. The main part of what we're going to say will be in the hands of Sophie and Kyle. What I'm going to do is just give an introduction, sort of general introduction to who we are and what we focus on. I'm not in charge of the slides though, so I'm hoping that somebody, if I click my fingers, they'll magically move forward, and they have. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. I think that's Sophie I should be thanking. So thank you, Sophie. So first thing to be really clear about is who we are and who we are not. So our statutory role is being the regulatory arm of the UK's system for official statistics. And official statistics in this context mean statistics produced by government on a vast range of different topics: the economy, the population, health, crime, the environment, welfare, and so on. OSR is independent from ministers. We report to the board of the UK Statistics Authority, which is a non-ministerial department. So we don't have any line into ministers. And it's worth emphasising that we are separate from ONS. And indeed, a significant component of our work is overseeing, reviewing, assessing the work of ONS. So that separation is really, really important to preserve our ability to make independent judgments. So that's who we are. What we are not is we are not ourselves a statistics producer. So those measurements that I've mentioned of inflation and crime and so on, we do not produce those. We form a view as to whether they meet the right required standards, but we don't ourselves produce them. We are also not subject to ONS governance or budget or reporting. So our governance is directly to the non-ministerial board of called the UK Statistics Authority. Our budget is set and agreed by that board, and our reporting aligns to that board. And for example, I report to the chair, Sir Robert Choate. One other thing to say is that we are not an auditor of individual sets of statistics. So whilst we have standards and we expect them to be complied with, we don't go in and check every number that is published because we're not remotely resourced to play that role. So that's who we are and who we are not. If we just move on, I actually think the most useful way of introducing us to you as an audience is sort of our worldview, the things that we care about, the things that we are really driven by. And this image or series of images really captures the core of what we care about, and indeed what our research is interested in, which is the social life of statistics. You might see our name, the Office for Statistics Regulation, and you might sort of imagine, you might perceive an organization which is heavily embedded in the technical aspects of statistics, of measurement. And we certainly do have that component to our work. We certainly do lots of things which are to do with methodology and things like that. But the more important driver of what we care about is not methodology or technique, it's the social life of statistics. And what these images capture is something that we talk about a lot, which is a sort of day in the life of statistics, how statistics actually appear in the lives of members of the population in different ways. Somebody might wake up in the morning and hear on the radio, in amongst kind of news of celebrities and songs and so on, they might hear something about house prices, latest statistics on house prices. They might not actively go and download the statistics, but nevertheless, the fact that they've heard something, it might influence or affect their perception of the world that they live in. Person that we conceptualize in this day in the life might be a parent, and they might be thinking about, well, what's the best school for my children? And in thinking about what the best school for their children is, they might draw on statistical evidence. Even if they don't do it directly themselves, they might be drawing on what Ofsted conclude, or they might be drawing on sort of the word of mouth of whether a school is a good school or a bad school, which might be underpinned by statistics. This citizen that we're imagining might have a day job as a marketing analyst. That's a more kind of direct, explicit use of statistics, in that marketing analyst might need to project some sales, might want to use kind of forecasts of economic growth or of inflation and plug those into those forecasts. That's a direct, it's less tacit than the other two uses I've mentioned already. The two bottom images capture other aspects of people and how statistics brush into their lives. Somebody in their community might care very much about a building program or some kind of development issue, and they might want to actually look at statistics about the environment, the community, what it's like as part of their activism in the community. And finally, this is an image we used a lot during the pandemic. People are often actively interested to understand the world around them, and we saw that a lot in the pandemic, and we coined this phrase, the armchair epidemiologist. Now, each of those little vignettes we could unpack in its own right. I think it's the breadth of them which is really important here, that statistics are not simply for central government decision makers or for ministers or for the Bank of England. They serve these multiple purposes, and that's what we're really interested in. If we could move on to the next slide. So just to formalize that a little bit more, these are the kind of the tenets which underpin our work. Statistics are an essential resource for understanding society and the economy. Of course, they enable evidence-based policy, but they also enable accountability and debate. We strongly advocate the view that official statistics are for everyone. They're not an elite tool. and they only can serve the public good when they are for everyone. Problematically, gaps, misinformation, a lack of engagement, political interference, those things can damage the asset of official statistics for everyone, and that is what really is our role to safeguard, is to mitigate the risks from gaps and misinformation and disengagement, and to support the positive uses of statistics for everyone. So we can move on. So that's what we care about. That's what we believe. We believe statistics are this public asset. They're a social good. They're not just for experts, and they're not best understood through a technical lens, but through this socio-technical lens. What do we actually do? Well, the core of our work is on the left-hand side. We set a code of practice for official statistics, and which is framed around the concepts of trustworthiness, quality, and value. And then we assess statistics against that code, and we accredit statistics that comply with the code in full. And that's kind of the core day-to-day work. It's the bedrock on which we build. To the extent that you've come across us, you may know that we sometimes make public interventions. We make interventions in how statistics are used in public debate. And on the middle block there, we've got some of the headlines we've secured in recent times. Quite often, we're called the statistics watchdog. That's not our term. It's a term that is used by the media as a shorthand for our role when we make these interventions. My favorite version I was once described in the Daily Mirror as the watchdog who cracks down on dodgy stats, which I like so much, is amazing. I haven't had it tattooed on my shoulder or something. The watchdog who cracks down on dodgy stats. And then finally, and really pertinent to today, the third thing we do after looking at how statistics are produced and how they're used, we consider how they are valued, because we want to develop a better understanding of the value of statistics, this public good. And that's the work that Sophie leads. It's really fascinating, and I think it underpins the statement of our areas of research integrity. So that's really a kind of overview of what we do, but more importantly, why we do it. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Sophie, who's going to unpack that and talk about our areas of research interest. Thank you very much, Sophie.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ed. So like Ed said, I'm OSR's head of research, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our research interests. So just like what Ed has said, our research interests are far broader than you might expect. Being a statistics regulator, we don't just care about statistical methods. And in fact, we've got areas of research interest for each of those three topics that Ed just mentioned. So how statistics are produced, used, and valued. We also have a fourth broad area of research interests that are cross-cutting as well. So I'm going to give you a bit of a flavor of these now. However, if you would like to see the full details, I am sharing with PowerPoint Live, so you should be able to click on these links if you would like to read the full document as well. So starting with our first broad area of research interest. Like Ed said, when we talk about the production of statistics, we're referring to trustworthiness, quality, and value. And we're particularly interested in these because they are the pillars of our code of practice. So when we get new evidence about them, we can use that to inform the standards that we set and the way that we regulate. Now, within this area, some of our particular interests are about trust in evidence. So what makes people see evidence as trustworthy? And how do views around trustworthiness then drive trust or use? We also care about what people value in official statistics. So what do people value in evidence? What influences how much value they can get from evidence? On our second broad area, we've got the use of statistics. And here we're interested in both use classically, but also misuse. And while we say in our research interests, primarily we are interested in statistics, a lot of the time people use other types of evidence in the same way they would use statistics. So we care about views on evidence more broadly. Here, one of our most interesting areas of research interest is about how misinformation propagates. So what makes data vulnerable to misuse? How can we address it? All of this ties directly into the function that Ed mentioned a minute ago with all these news reports about the stats watchdog. because people can contact us and raise concerns about things like misinformation and misuse related to official statistics. In terms of use, we also really care about the role of public confidence in the use of statistics. So if we want statistics to be for everyone, the public needs to believe in them. Here, we're interested in things like, what do people need to have confidence in evidence? And how can we build that confidence? Having this kind of information is really useful to understand what kind of recommendations we should make across our statistical system to help these statistics serve the public good. Our third broad area of research interest is the value of statistics, which is all about statistics serving the public good. And here we think about things like, how can we bring the public into conversations about the public good so that their views can inform our work and shape the way that our statistical system functions? We also explore, perhaps a bit more straightforwardly, what statistics serving the public looks like. And this is an area we've invested in quite a lot. So we do a lot of research here with the view that the better we understand how statistics serve the public good, the better we can make sure that it's happening. Now, the final really broad area of research interest I've got here is cross-cutting topics. And this includes how the first three interests interact with each other, as well as topics that cut across all of them. For example, we do quite a lot of work on communicating uncertainty. Now, this is the idea that when people see a statistic, they think it's something really concrete and definite. But actually, even when the right methods and the right data are used, usually an estimate. The way that that estimate and the uncertainty around it is communicated has a massive impact. If it's communicated well, people might use the statistics well. If it's communicated poorly, though, people might misinterpret the statistics, or they might lose all confidence in using them because communication of uncertainty really undermines that. Another cross-cutting interest for us is about the impact of the increasing sophistication of large language models and other types of AI, specifically on how statistics and data are produced, on how people access and consume them, and also on how people feel about this. Now, this area is particularly important to us at the moment because we're beginning to develop our 5-year strategy, and we're currently reviewing our code of practice for statistics. And it's really important that when we set these long-term standards, that they are relevant with societal change. Now, like I said at the start of this slide, my intention here is only to give you a flavour of our research interests. There is so much more detail in our published statement. And if any of the areas I've mentioned to you so far sound at all relevant, I recommend you use the hyperlink and take a look and find out more. We've also got the question and answer session at the end of today, where I'm very happy to discuss any of our research interests with you. And I've put our email address on the screen if you want to talk to my team directly. Now, what I've said so far is essentially, we want you to tell us about all of these areas, but actually we have already begun identifying and putting together some evidence. Of course, we are always interested in traditional experimental evidence. For example, the Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication did a lot of work on communicating risk, which informed our view on communicating uncertainty. And the Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence did a lot of work on understanding how people feel and think and understand economic statistics. But the thing I want to really emphasize today is that that's not the only type of evidence that we look for. So if you work in a completely different area, we still want to hear from you. And I'm going to select 3 examples to illustrate just how broad the type of evidence we're interested in is. So, firstly, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe did a load of work on valuing statistics. And perhaps one area that you might not expect us to be interested in is that they looked at the linguistics. They looked at different concepts and they tried to understand this. And that really informed some of our understanding about the public good and value. As well as informing our work, we've supported their work as well. For example, Ed wrote the foreword to one of their reports, and we've presented alongside them at some international conferences where we've been able to champion their findings. The second thing I want to highlight is our think piece about the public good. Now, this pulls together things like surveys, public engagement, discussions with international experts. And we synthesize in this all of the evidence that we gathered about how statistics serve the public good to give us an initial position about it. And if you do take a look at this, you'll see how varied the evidence is that we're interested in. It's also formed the basis of a journal article, and in that, obviously, we fully credit all of the people who supported us at that work. So I just want to reassure you that if you do choose to work with us, we will make sure that you do get credit for what you've done. And the final thing I want to pick up on here is Ken Roy's discussion about potential impacts of AI on official statistics. And I think Ken might be here with us today, so apologies, Ken, for picking this one out if this makes you uncomfortable. But essentially, I want to say Ken is an independent researcher with a fascinating perspective on this topic. And listening to him, he's given us these incredible new insights. And despite the fact that he's not in a traditional university setting, so it doesn't matter where you're based, we still think that you have something that can add to our work. I like to think that as well as all of the help Ken has given us, that we've been able to amplify his message as well. For example, he authored a guest blog post that we hosted on our website. So hopefully that's given you an idea of the variety of evidence and sources that we're interested in. And we would really like you to be involved in helping us find and create more evidence to support these areas of research interest. Now, on this slide, I've picked out a few pieces of evidence that we have. And one of these rectangles that isn't hyperlinked is Kyle's work on misleadingness, which is an absolutely fascinating example of the type of work that we are interested in. And I'm now going to pass you over to Kyle, who we are very grateful for joining us today, so that you can learn more about his work.
Hello. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. I just dropped in the chat. There is now a hyperlink to our work together on misleadingness, which is very exciting. I think it's recent enough that it may be more recent than the slides. So here it is now. So hello everyone. I'm Kyle. I'm joining from Canada, so pardon the morning light cutting across my face. I think that I mostly introduced myself on the next slide. So Sophie, is that you? Awesome, thank you. So so hello, I'm Kyle. We did that part already. I'm a PhD student in the Applied Philosophy program at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. I have a bachelor's degree in pure mathematics and teaching that I did also at the same school. I've been here for what feels like a million years. And then after that, when I finished that, I started a master's degree in philosophy and then finished that, and now am about halfway through doing my PhD in philosophy. And that strikes many people to whom I say it as kind of a strange trajectory, especially when I get to the part where I went from philosophy to then working with statistics regulators for a little while. That's a connection that people don't often make. So maybe it would be helpful to say a little bit about how I got here, which is our next slide. Awesome. Yeah, so I did an undergraduate degree in mathematics, and I did enough courses at that time to have a minor in philosophy, so that was a small handful, which I did truly. The honest truth is that I did that because it's just something I thought a smart person should do, and at that time I perhaps somewhat what now strikes me as somewhat arrogantly thought of myself as a smart person and was like, I'll just do this because that's what smart people do. But I took a couple really interesting courses, including one towards the end of undergrad, which for me was in late 2020, a course about deception, lying, misleadingness, and a handful of sort of related issues circling around communication in the philosophy of language. I also took some courses about philosophy of economics. I took a sort of special seminar course called Pandemic Philosophy, covering a bunch of issues swirling around related to the pandemic. And so those all turned out to be really interesting. I found out that not only was philosophy something that I, associated with this aspirational ideal, but also it was something that I could read about and talk about and take courses about and find a bunch of ways that it was super relevant to things that were happening in the world around me. One of the things that I worked on in one of those courses was studying conspiracy theories. I worked on looking at some of the election fraud conspiracies in the United States that were circling around at that time. One of which that I wound up writing about actually was about a use of statistics for the purposes of sort of fostering some of these theories. And so the sort of common thread here is that the philosopher who was teaching those courses, Jennifer Saul, she sort of really opened up my mind about like what kinds of things even count as philosophy, what sorts of things I could do. And so when I finished my undergrad, I thought, well, I'd rather like to keep doing more of that. And so I signed up to work with her for my master's degree and now for my PhD. And Jenny, prior to meeting me, had worked with OSR before. You've got the link to the version of a think piece that I was involved in. There are a couple prior iterations of that are sort of more heavily based on conversations with Jenny, among others. And so she introduced me to Ed. I think you were the first one I met. So she introduced me to Ed and to the sort of notion of OSR, which was something I was unfamiliar with. As far as I'm aware, Canada does not have an equivalent, which is a shame. We got to get on that. So she introduced me to Ed and to OSR. And then when I started my PhD, there's a component of our applied philosophy PhD program that requires us to go and do what's called an applied research placement. And that is a 4-month placement where we sort of seek out our own like host agency, and we spend some time working with them, contributing our philosophical insights to whatever problems it is that they're working on. That very often looks like people, there's a lot of bioethicists in our program who go and do placements with hospitals. There's some sense in which I am kind of the odd one out. I'm the only one who has done something that was in sort of in the statistics world, which was a lot of fun. I'm also the only one who did one that was not in Canada, but it's an option, which was a great deal for me. So we met a couple more times, chatted about what that would look like, what sorts of things I would be involved in doing, and what sorts of projects I might be able to help you guys with, what sorts of, what the benefits would be for me, for you. And fortunately, I managed to, I guess, convince Ed that I'm worth having around. So I sort of, through that connection with Jenny Saul, wound up doing this placement. So I went from very mathy to like very philosophy of languagey to now having circled back around to kind of doing some more mathy stuff again. Although much of what I did for OSR, as we'll see in a minute, was more languagey. So, oh wow, you're very good, Sophie. So on that subject, some of the stuff I did for OSR. The biggest thing, the sort of major contribution that I did to OSR, my sort of overarching project, was this idea of definition revising. And so that's the major content of the think piece that is linked in the chat now, is to try and look at OSR's definition for what constitutes a misleading use of statistics, and to do what philosophers do with every definition you put in front of us, which is to subject it to an unending barrage of bizarre thought experiments until we can make it break. To see where the things that we do in practice and the things that we sort of say we're doing in a definition start to come apart. And once you've figured out where those things come apart, you now have basically, there's a couple things you can do. One thing you can do, that this is not a route that very many people take, is to just say, okay, well, I guess we don't do what we say we're doing and leave it at that and just say they're different. which most people don't go for that one. The other couple things you can do are you can either adjust what you do, or you can adjust the thing you say you're doing. And so we did a little bit of, I think we did a little bit of both, but we did mostly, I think, on the definition revising side. There were a couple minor ways in which we wanted to tweak that, a couple things that I thought were maybe places we could adjust how we talk about the work that OSR does to sort of better reflect what we're, I'm going to keep saying we, even though I did less of the casework stuff, where OSR was sort of to bring that definition more in line with the casework that's being done and so on. But to try and tease those two things back together once you have separated them, to try and figure out how you can reconcile two things that seem like they might be different. Another thing that I did, and this is something that the sort of access to the academic network, if you like, is very helpful for, is organizing workshops. So particularly, we held one at OSR in January that was themed around the subject of context collapse, which is something that another philosopher of language in the United Kingdom, Lucy MacDonald, has worked on pretty extensively. And so she and I, in sort of collaboration with OSR, were able to organize this get-together in London at the OSR headquarters, where we were sort of able to sit everyone down and for a couple hours, I think, talk through a bunch of different philosophers' ideas about how this sort of framework might be applicable to what we were talking about, to the sort of study and combat of misleading statistics, to the cracking down on of dodgy statistics, if I can borrow, I guess, Ed's preferred formulation. And so that was another opportunity. That was exciting for me because I got to come to London, which was great. Most of my work has been remote in this digital age, but it was a lot of fun to come and sort of properly meet everybody. And that has, I like to think it's been fruitful. It seems to have been fruitful because we're organizing another one in the coming months. So I guess at least Ed thought it was helpful. He's nodding enthusiastically. That's good. I hesitate to put words in your mouth. And then the last, I've actually just realized this is not the last. The second to last one on the slides. I'll have another one that's just, I'm just going to say out loud. I did some casework consulting with OSR as well in places where, particularly where the worry was about misleading communication of statistics, or especially swirling around something we were talking about earlier. I think, Sophie, you brought up the communication of uncertainty. How do you express that both this is our best estimate and that it's been done appropriately and carefully with all the statistical rigor that you would like it to have, but that it is maybe nevertheless still fundamentally uncertain? It's still an estimate. Is there a way to sort of walk that line without sort of risking undermining confidence in the statistical system, which of course we don't want to do. And so I did some consulting on a couple cases for that as well. And then the last thing that I did that I didn't slipped my mind until Sophie was talking about it earlier is I worked with Sophie about trying to figure out what it means for statistics to serve the public good, which I feel like as a philosophy PhD, it's like some sort of strike against me that thinking about the public good was not the first thing that came to my mind. It's been our gimmick for like 2,500 years. But that's another thing that I was involved in. I read earlier versions of the public good think piece. Sophie and we had a couple sort of very long meetings where we went back and forth about like, well, what about this thing? Do we want to say it this way? What does it mean to be sort of neutral with respect to conceptions of the public good in the way that OSR identifies as being? What does it mean to try and say that statistics serve the public good without necessarily wanting to give like a robust characterization of these four things or constitute the public good? To sort of have this more expansive approach, this idea about safeguarding the use of statistics in public debate, making sure that it's used responsibly and carefully. And so that was another thing that I worked on for a chunk of time with OSR. Yeah, okay, awesome. You can just tell when I lose my train of thought that it's time to go to a new slide. So some of the benefits for OSR, which hopefully now you all don't look at and think, wait a second, that didn't happen. So hopefully I am only listing benefits that you think are really true. So one of them is this idea of providing an action guiding revision to a working definition. So what we were talking about way back at the beginning about that core of the philosopher's toolkit, which is to take your definitions and your sort of casework, look at the two, see how they fit together, see where they come apart, see where you can refine one to work one way or the other. And the purpose here, as I think you'd see reflected in the think piece if you read it, the sort of big goal is to make sure that we have something that is not something that's sort of abstractly very clever, but fundamentally very, very difficult to apply to any real circumstance. But when I say that I want something to be action guiding, what I mean is that it's something you can actually then practically go out and apply. You can look at a sort of a particular use of statistics and you have some helpful criteria that you can say, okay, does it do this? Yes. Does it do that? Yes. Does it do this? Okay. Then it's, then we know that OSR has reason to be concerned. Does it only do one of those things? Maybe not. Does it do none of them? Then no. Great. Nice work, user of statistics. So that's the sort of the hope with any applied philosophy project, is that you ultimately create something that is, you would like it to be very clever, but you also want it to be very useful. You don't want it to be some, the kind of head in the clouds formulation that we are perhaps regrettably infamous for. Another benefit that I will attribute to my work with OSR is that we were able to broaden OSR's connection to other academics in, I've said related fields here. Mostly I mean other subdisciplines of philosophy. Most of the people that I know as academics are philosophers, because that's kind of where I work. But we were able to sort of, between the two of us, or I think mostly between me and Ed, and then also Lucy, we were able to put together, I think, a pretty interesting list of philosophers to have come in and weigh in on some of these definitional and categorization issues, drawing from I think a fairly diverse array of philosophical backgrounds. We had some political philosophers involved. We had some philosophers of language. Since then, this is maybe an aside. Since then, I've gone on to meet a bunch of philosophers of statistics. So I've got more names for you, Ed, that I'll send your way. So that, as you can see, is an ongoing benefit. I keep meeting new people, and I keep thinking, hey, I should tell them all about how cool OSR is. In fact, I'm doing it right now. And another benefit that I have that I've attributed here, I got a round of. So I don't use Teams very often. The little round of applause thing just showed up, and that was surprised me. The other benefit that I'm able to provide for OSR is to provide an outside examination of some of the core issues that they're trying to tackle. I think that testing our thinking is almost the unofficial motto of my interactions with Ed. Sort of a common refrain was that he was very happy to have me testing their thinking. He would love to have me test their thinking on this, so on and so on. And that's something that philosophers love to do. We really love to look at things that people say and kind of poke and prod at them and see where they fall apart. It's a little bit like having a conversation with a better trained version of a really inquisitive child who keeps asking why over and over and over and over again, and refuses to let you get away with saying anything unjustified. Even if you have a justification, it sort of forces you to draw it out. So that's part of what I would say was what hopefully OSR sees as a benefit. The purpose of that sort of endless barrage of questioning is ultimately not to draw out some sort of fundamental vulnerability or anything like that. The idea is that it helps you develop your own thinking about what you believe, and develop the justifications for why you believe it that you're able to provide, to sort of help you draw connections that you may have sort of always had implicitly up here, but that you've never had any reason to articulate before now, because most sort of reasonable people stop after a couple whys and the philosophers just keep going. And so that's something that we were able to do in order to that's basically what I did for 4 months, was just ask why a bunch, and sort of offer some tentative explanations every once in a while, and sort of collaboratively build up some of these ideas. Okay, so I think we can go to what I think is my last slide. So there's, I think, clearly a lot of benefits for OSR. They continue to invite me to do things, so that's at least some evidence I did a good job. And OSR's work, at least to my mind, is very obviously important. So it's great to have been involved in that. But also, you're not entirely out of line to think what's in it for me. So I'll talk a little bit about not only the benefits for OSR, but also some of the benefits for me. And the first one I want to mention that does not appear on these slides, but it occurred to me that since I had said it previously, I better say it again, is connections to other academics in related fields. That was a benefit for OSR, to be sure, but it was also a benefit for me. I got a chance to meet and work with people who I had, in some cases, I had met before, but in others I had not. It gave me a sort of an excuse to reach out to people whose work I admire and consider to be impressive, and say, hey, there's this really cool project I'm working on right now that I think you might be interested in as well. We should talk about it. I have some of them I had met briefly, some of them I had met a couple times. Others I had never met, but had read some of their work and thought, wow, this is like really insightful stuff. What a cool opportunity that I now get to fly out to London and have like a conference with you. So that's super, super helpful. In terms of benefits for me, there's one that's, I guess, going to be idiosyncratic, but I felt would be wrong to omit. The applied research placement is a program requirement for me. So I did need to do something like this in order to complete my PhD. So thanks very much, Ed, Sophie, and OSR for enabling me to complete my PhD. That's gonna be important for me. And now I'll get into some that I think will probably generalize a bit better. One is that it gives you an opportunity to go and apply the theories that you might have to some much more complicated real world cases, right? When we as philosophers are constructing our thought experiments, they tend to be often idealized. They tend to construct somewhat unusual sets of circumstances. There's the infamous trolley problem where one has to imagine under what possible circumstances did we wind up with all these people tied to train tracks. So we tend to sort of play around in some of these spaces where it's not super obvious how that stuff is going to apply. Doing an applied research placement or working on applied research like I did with OSR was a great opportunity to bring some sometimes very abstract theorizing about what is said, the semantic content of utterances, bringing that to bear on, instead of some sort of idealized utterance like the sky is blue, to look at a much more complicated remark about the current state of gross domestic product subject to some revisions that have just happened, so on. So the details get a lot more intricate, and you really get to sort of test the mettle of the theories that you have been developing in this sort of pre-applied sort of way. So that's tremendously helpful in, as much as I was testing OSR's thinking about the stuff they were working on, they were also testing my thinking about the stuff I was working on. Any sort of theory that is concocted and then never really tested against the real world is sort of clearly, seems to me anyway, to be deficient in some way. Like you have to sort of put it through the trial by fire at some point. And then the other sort of, the ultimate benefit, this is something I remember, Ed, when we were first meeting to talk about this, you said something like, I want to make sure that this is going to be worth it to you, that this is going to be an opportunity that is sort of sufficiently rewarding for you. It definitely was in all the academic ways. Recently, it has also become so in like the money way, which is great. Because I don't think I've had a chance to tell you about this yet. I won like a big federal scholarship in Canada that I think is largely due to the work I was doing with OSR. Because I was able to say, like, here's this super cool applied thing I did that nobody else in philosophy gets the chance to do. And so it really is something that helps you articulate. So on the one side, it looks really good, right? It's something you can say, here's a thing I did that is, a sort of very impressive appearing. People will look at that and think, wow, that's awesome. My understanding is that in United Kingdom academia, the magic word for this is impact. I'm in Canada, so I'm less well versed in exactly what that means, but I've been told to say that this is a great way to demonstrate the impact of your research. So hopefully that means more to the UK academics in the crowd than it does to me. So that's one thing that was super beneficial, but also it made me a lot better at talking about my research with people who are not philosophers. We fall into patterns, I think, as academics of talking a lot about the stuff we're really interested in with other people who are like super, super into it. And so you can say things, in a way that is not necessarily the most accessible to someone who has not spent the last several years reading a bunch of philosophy. And working with OSR gave me the opportunity to get a lot better at explaining why other people should care about what I'm doing. And so that also was very helpful in terms of like, and as a professional development thing in terms of applying for grants and fellowships and applications and stuff like that. So that's the end of my little spiel here, which is good because I think it's very nearly the end of my time as well. Thanks very much for having me to talk about this.
Brilliant. Thank you, Carl. That was really useful. And you've certainly taken a few things that I'll be mentioning after the break about kind of why you should engage with ARIs, because a lot of it is repetitive. So it'll be a nice refresher. But if we come back in 5 minutes, so at 13:58, if you want to go and grab a drink, stand up, do some stretches, anything you need to do, please don't continue looking at your screen and checking your emails. It's meant to be a break. We'll see you back at 13:58. Thanks very much, and thanks, Carl, for that set of examples. It was a really good good introduction.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. Apart from doing what Alison's doing, is looking for examples of the trolley problem on sitcoms. So Kyle, I don't know whether you've seen the chat there. Yeah, you have. Awesome. We'll get started with my bit, which effectively will kind of highlight some of what Kyle's talking about, maybe link it a little bit more to a kind of UK context, but think about why engage with ARIs. And apart from the standard kind of quote from George Mallory, as an outdoor enthusiast, this one's always there because it's there. These things are there, so why aren't you playing with them? They're an opportunity to understand and see what a different audience is thinking about, is struggling with, and research is often about understanding stuff, for want of a better term. This gives you an opportunity to know what other people are interested in, want solutions to, so it's a great way of giving you opportunities. The main and first point I'd like to kind of talk about, I suppose, is it depends on who you are and where you are and what you need. So ARIs are great, and the reason to engage with them can be multiple, but it depends on the position you're coming at it from. If you're someone like Kyle, as a researcher, you're looking at a particular topic, a particular issue, and this gives you an opportunity to further your knowledge, and that's great. But there may well be people on the call who are also kind of knowledge brokers and mobilizers, who are looking at the ways in which their colleagues, their researchers that they work with and connect to, can make a difference out there in the world, can have an impact. In some ways, I like to talk about making a difference rather than impact, because impact has a bit of a loaded term in the UK, as Carl's kind of already talked about with REF. Some people get a bit nervous and a bit shaky when we talk about REF, and not everyone gets put in the box of being a refable person or an impact case study person. So if we think about making a difference, this is a great, ARIs are a great opportunity for you to be able to see where other people have similar challenges, opportunities, and wants that you may be able to answer, either with stuff that you're already doing or with stuff that you've done before that you forgot about and you thought, oh, I did that work over there and I didn't think anyone was interested in it, but I've just read that someone needs the answer to that, and I've got it, or I know people who can. And so it's those two different pathways in terms of being a researcher or a knowledge broker that's really important to understand, that ARIs provide a space and an arena and an opportunity for you to do that. And it may be about new stuff, it may be about stuff in the past. So hopefully ARIs are one of those places and spaces where you can go and find out, and you can answer that question when academics come to you as a knowledge broker and go, I've been told I need to do impact stuff, but I don't know where, and I don't know what those questions are. How do I know what people want to know? And ARIs are a great way of going, well, have you looked at what the government in the UK, devolved administrations, whether that's the Senedd in Wales or up in Scotland or in Northern Ireland, or even, as we're seeing more and more, local authorities like Leeds City Council, or the Office for Statistic Regulation, or the Met Police, or the National Police Chiefs Council, the Office for Science and Policing. What are the things they're struggling with? How can I help answer that? And that gives you that societal benefit in terms of making that difference. So along to that, so I'm knocking my computer over. Here are some of those questions that we hear kind of regularly when people talk about ARIs. And I know, Ed, you mentioned kind of being a good citizen, but this is a way of helping. This is a way of making a difference. It's a way of sort of making you feel a bit warmer, that the stuff you're doing is being read by more than just the 4 people who you kind of engage with as an academic, and your mum, parent, father, other half, who probably says they read it but don't. Let's be brutally honest. So this is a way of getting your stuff out there to other people, and whether seeing that you can make a difference. It also, let's be honest, helps your higher education establishment, your university or research space, with some of those metrics around REF, to the Research Excellence Framework and the Knowledge Exchange Framework, to do some of that work that, as publicly funded organisations in the UK, kind of have a bit of an obligation to do, but also it helps us get a bit more money as an organisation. It helps us do that. It also is, as Carl talks about, acts as that kind of critical friend, that voice on the shoulder to say, are you doing this as well as you can? Are you making sense? Because it's you think like you're making sense, you say you're making sense, but have you ever tested it and checked it? So it allows you to be that kind of supporter of people you work with, or even people that you might want to work with, to offer that critical challenge, that supportive kind of voice to go, you know what, there's an opportunity here. It is also a great place to challenge and develop your own research practice. It brings you out of your kind of space into meeting new people, being challenged on what you think about the world, and that's always useful. I found one of the things, the main things I found is that it helps people ask different questions. Now, you may have been doing research for a long time, you may be in a bit of a rut, you may be thinking, I need to do something different. Having someone else ask questions about a topic similar to your interests is a great way of developing that and doing that, I always find. And as Carl said, you get to work with different people. Sometimes people that you really want to work with that you didn't know how you could get in touch with. It gives you that opportunity with an ARI because they are putting those things in different spaces. It will also, hopefully, give you a bit of traction on a research application because you can point to an ARI that says, look, this is a real important question. These people, whether they're a government department, OSR, or others, who they need the answer to this, and I'm helping, and that's a really useful thing to have on your kind of narrative statement when you're putting in a research bid. And they're also really useful if you're trying to persuade people to kind of move forward. Normally someone says, someone told me I need to do this because it was useful for impact, and that's what I need for my career. Or as a knowledge broker, I need to be able to show ways that our academics can come and get involved in a kind of policy and civic space, and ARIs are a way of finding out how to do that. So I've got 2 sets of slides, that's the one I want. So they provide that window into an organization. They take a long time to develop. They can be quite challenging things to develop because, especially at a government department level, there are lots of different priorities, lots of different topics and issues that maybe people want to research. So they go through a really long and and I'm not saying OSIs are at all, but I've heard from some government departments, very torturous experience of which questions are we actually going to put down on paper? How are we going to word them? Are they worded in the right way that makes sense to us, that makes sense to our partners, that makes sense to the academic community, so that we get the answers? Because you don't want to put an ARI out there and someone goes, sorry, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean by that question? So they go through a long and well-developed process, and there's guides for how you build ARIs now. But they mean that there's a window into those needs, and they're a really useful way, even if you don't go forward and use the ARI specifically, they're a way of understanding what government departments and organizations are thinking about and understanding. And really great when we run these events to hear kind of from people like Ed and Sophie, the things that they really get motivated by, the things that they really want to help solve, the challenges that they've got, so that you can understand them. And it's a great way of making sure that you're on the right path, I suppose. So that question of, well, how? I've seen them, I've heard about them. The ARI database is a really great one to understand and see. Sophie's already mentioned the kind of email address to get in touch with OSR. If you go and have a look, their ARI questions that they've written are all on the ARI database. So alongside the link that Sophie sent, if you go on the general, which is just ari.org.uk website, unfortunately you were at the bottom, aren't you, Sophie, in terms of the list? I'm assuming it's last in, bottom of the list, but you're on that page in terms of these are the questions that OSR have got. These are the things that they're interested in. You can click on them really nicely because it's a bit of a developed platform. You can see other projects that have similar connectivity to those questions, so you can understand where you fit. But if you match and understand it, you can then go, oh, I've got an answer to that. Either I've got an answer ready and I can give it, or I'm really interested in exploring that question, and it's a great way of just testing. Well, and it'll be an email to someone like Sophie. Sophie, have you answered that question yet? Are you doing any work on it? Are there any people already doing it? Is someone like Carl running a workshop to bring people together? Could I be one of those people who takes part in that workshop? Can I meet and network with those people who are already working on it? Or, well, you said you've got a question. What are you doing about answering that? Is there anything going on? Could I be someone who could help you with that? Or I really want to do some further research on this. If I tweak it slightly, can I help? So it's a really great way of kind of developing those opportunities and seeing where you go. And whilst there isn't necessarily, generally there never is any magic money to pay for your research, it would be amazing if there was. And sometimes you can be lucky and there's a few £1,000s down the back of a sofa for very small projects for some of these ARIs. they lead to that kind of engagement and letter of support, which often can be more valuable than a smaller bit of research, because it might lead to a much bigger grant or a bigger opportunity. You might get that letter of support. You might get, as Carl's kind of shown in his case study, engagement with people at OSR who can really help, not only with that placement, but for further career opportunities, to say, well, this person's done really well with us. Look what they've developed. Here's an example. Here's a public display of this kind of beneficial work. And you should play with them more. They're really good. We thought they were really useful. So that is something that you can't really create or develop. And we sort of suggested it's there. So what we found doing the ARI work as a subcommittee, we still need more evidence and more work. And one of the things we're going to be doing this year is kind of trying to evaluate the impact and the usefulness of ARIs, because they're there, that they've been produced. There isn't much information on, well, how valuable are they? How many questions have been developed? Look, the stat that everyone talks about, and Ed, you can challenge me on the veracity of this stat and whether I've developed it properly, is that 80% of questions in the ARI database have already got some form of research that might help answer them. Now, that is really interesting in terms of, does it answer the question completely? Does it answer part of the question? Is it in the related scope of that? But also it challenges that point about, well, is the research that is created actually developed in any useful format that someone can pick up from, say, the OSR to then use in the work that they're doing, or does it need further engagement and connection? I think what we've seen from Kyle's example is that often it's the relationship that you build and the development of that trust and that understanding between them as partners that leads to something useful. It doesn't magically just happen because someone's done some research, someone's got a question, and magically they overlap and connect. There will always be the fuzziness and that further creation of work and opportunities that's really important. And that relationship building thing is, I think, one of the really important and valuable things that we really see, and what we want to produce through the ARI subcommittee is more understanding of the best ways of doing that, more examples of how we do that, so that people can see more clearly kind of what happens and how it's developed. So, as I said before, just to kind of wrap up from me really before I pass back to Sophie, we're a team of kind of 35 volunteers who are interested in ARIs and want to understand how we make them more valuable, how we grow them and develop them, but also how we socialize them, how we get more people like yourselves aware of them, so you can go, oh, that's an opportunity I can see. That's a way I can use that for my colleagues, for myself, for my wider network. So please talk about them, share them, make people aware that they're available. And if you've got questions or you've got ideas for how you think they can be made better, then please kind of come back to us and use that. Obviously, we've got the UPEN website where we talk about this, the events that go out through UPEN, through the newsletter that kind of Laura does a lot of hard work behind the scenes to make out there and make useful, are available for that. And we'll be putting on more of these events for other ARIs, but we'll also be exploring kind of evaluations and leading practice and how we think about the new types of ARIs that are being developed in other places and spaces, and for kind of non-ministerial bodies like OSR who are kind of pushing forward with this and saying, this is something that we think is really useful. How do we help make those better? So that's why I suppose we think these need to be kind of promoted. We think this is why it's a really useful way of kind of pushing and developing ARIs as an opportunity to really cement that kind of academic and policy kind of connection, because they really do help, we think. Hopefully in the next year or so we'll have more evidence to say, with more convincing stats, why they're useful and how they're useful and in what ways other people can use it. So yeah, thanks very much, and I'm going to hand over back to you, Sophie. So thanks.
Thanks, Rich. So hopefully from everything Rich has said, Kyle has said, and Ed has said, you will be convinced that you want to engage with us and use our areas of research interest. So to help you with that, I've had a bit of a think about how you could do that. So we think it's really important to involve new ideas, different perspectives, and to really develop our understanding. I think, Kyle, you said test our thinking, and to inform our regulation. And there are so many opportunities for you to get involved with that. And I'm going to share a few of them with you now. So the first idea is that we sometimes require external expertise for our work. For example, of course, we've worked with Kyle with his expertise on philosophy and misleadingness. But we also procured really technical things like an independent expert to review our regulation around the COVID infection survey. And this year we procured someone to look into administrative data-based population estimates. So if you want to be involved with some kind of consultancy like this, you can get in touch with us and tell us about what your expertise are and how they relate to our areas of research interest. That way, when we come to the point where we need an expert, we can look at our list and we can reach out to you if that expertise is required. We also have a really strong presence across government. So like Ed said at the start, we regulate all official statistics across the UK and devolved governments. So we have contacts in every department and organisation. When we find evidence that's really relevant and useful and we think will benefit that statistical system, we do share it with our audience. So for example, we've hosted guest blog posts, we've ran seminars for government analysts, and we've used our newsletter to highlight other people's work as well. So if you're doing work that you think government would want to see and could benefit from, and especially if it's related to our areas of research interest, please get in touch and we're happy to have a chat with you about whether there's something we can support you reaching that government audience. Now, like Rich said, we don't have a big pool of money that we can just throw at you. So partly because it's government, no one ever has money, and partly because there are very strict procurement guidelines. However, there have been instances where a program or an organization has goals that align so closely with ours that we've co-funded projects with them together. Now, this isn't an open offer to everyone, but I will say that when we've done it in the past, it's worked really well. For example, a couple of years ago, we co-funded a public dialogue project with Administrative Data Research UK programme. And we found that that was really helpful. So by co-funding it, obviously, both organisations only paid half the cost. But working together really enriched the insights we got. And like Kyle and Rich have been saying today, it's really that broadening of the network and getting new perspectives that was so valuable. If you did want to explore this as an option with us, to be very candid, we have no remaining research budget this financial year. However, we would still love to hear from you and to understand how our goals overlap and how our interests intertwine so that we can plan future potential projects. We can also support you with resources that aren't related to. For example, last year, some researchers got in touch with us who were exploring misinformation, and we helped them with their research by sharing anonymized real-life examples of where statistics have been subject to high-profile misuse. We're especially willing to help with resources like this when the research supports a common aim. So again, this is another reason to read our areas of research interest and let us know how your work relates to them. One thing that's been highlighted quite a lot by everyone today is that we're really invested in building these networks of experts who have similar interests to us. Now, one benefit for you, if you wanted to be part of our network, is that we do connect individuals to other researchers or academics or stakeholders that they may not have been aware of before. For example, this year, we've put some people who are researching the quantitative data of climate change in touch with experts across multiple government departments and other academics to help them get a better understanding of the data that they're using. And of course, Kyle has spoken about the roundtables that he has convened and is doing another one about. Now, you're very welcome to join our network by contacting us and telling us how you fit into our research interests. But we'd also love to join your networks too to broaden our connections. So like Kyle said, when he's meeting these people who are philosophers about statistics and he's saying, oh, I can share that information with you, that's exactly what we want to hear, to really broaden our perspective with that. Another way that you can engage with our research work is that when we run research projects, we convene project advisory groups. And the purpose of these is to make sure that our work is as thorough and as relevant as possible. Now, these groups can be quite prestigious if you want to say something for your career that you've sat on in a statistics regulators project advisory group. And the great thing is that they're really, really open in the membership. So you don't necessarily need to work in statistics, data or evidence, or even on one of our areas of research interest to be in part of these groups. For example, we're currently doing a research project about how people use statistics to make decisions about their lives. And we do have a statistics expert in there, but we've also got an ethics expert and a public engagement expert. So it's really important to us to get this wide range of perspectives. And if you'd like to be considered for being in one of those future groups, please get in touch with us, express your interest, and tell us how you think you could benefit our work. And we'd love to hear from you. Another thing that Rich alluded to was letters of support for funding. So in instances where we think that projects are likely to substantially contribute to our research interests, we have written letters of support for this. Now, we don't just do this if someone just randomly emails us and says, write us a letter, but if you can show how your work substantially contributes to our needs, we will consider it. And a letter from someone like Ed, who is a really senior government official, can be very valuable in demonstrating the need for your work. As well as demonstrating need for your work, we can also demonstrate the impact of it, or wait, making a difference, not impact. I picked that up now, Rich, thank you. So we always appreciate people sending us relevant evidence to use. And if we do use it to make a judgment or to inform a publication, we do cite you and we credit you as an author. So if you've got any work that is already out there that is relevant to our ARIs, please do share it with us and we'd love to use it to inform our thinking. There are also some rare occasions where a research proposal is so closely aligned with our goals and our ethos that we're willing to be recognised as a partner on it. Now, this isn't something we do frequently, but that in itself is good because it means that our brand carries a lot of weight, especially across government. So if you think that your work is suitable for this, we would love to discuss it with you. And the final thing I've got here is I've spoken a lot about amplifying expertise and evidence of other people, but it's worth being aware that OSR is a recognised authority in our own right as well. We've had quite a few occasions where academics or other researchers have contacted us about our areas of research interest, and we've been able to actually provide them with expert advice on their work in these areas. You are very welcome, therefore, to contact us if you have any questions about statistics regulation, or if there's any parts of our areas of research interest that you think we might have evidence about that might be helpful to benefit you too. Now, these are kind of all of the ways that you could engage with our research and our ARIs and our evidence needs. But I think our comms team would be quite unhappy if I didn't mention that there are other ways you can get involved with our work as well. So as Ed said right at the start of today, we regulate statistics using this code of practice, which sets out the pillars of trustworthiness, quality, and value. And that is technically for official statistics. But trustworthiness, quality, and value are relevant to everyone, especially people producing evidence. And there's a whole community of people who voluntarily apply those pillars to their work and publicly commit to doing that. And we would love it if you wanted to join that community of voluntary application. If you do join, it helps to support public confidence in your work because you're demonstrating commitment to these set standards and recognized standards. And just to reassure you, if you're thinking, I don't do anything like statistics, this is not relevant to me at all, actually, it's such a varied community. There's an annual award given to it by the Royal Statistical Society, Civil Service World, and OSR. And this year, our voluntary application award went to the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority. So no matter what you work in, this could be relevant to you. If you did want to join that community, I've got the link here on this slide to the website about it, and there's some guidance on there, or you're welcome to contact us for advice. And you'll see here I've put a slightly different email address on this slide. So this is our not research email address, our regulation one. So if you want to talk to us about anything beyond research, that's the best place to contact us. Now, if you're interested in our work more generally, I recommend you sign up to our monthly newsletter, which gives you the highlights of our work. Or you can connect with us on LinkedIn, which is where we have a sort of bonus newsletter about casework. So if you're interested in understanding our interventions and statistics related concerns, that would be the place for you to go. If you wanted really timely information, We post about our new publications and things that we're up to on X. So that is a great place to find out what we're doing. And finally, I have mentioned casework a few times. The idea that if you've got a concern about statistics or evidence that's being in a way that statistics might be, you can contact us and raise some casework and tell us about your concern. So it's not just something for officials to do, it's literally any member of the public. For example, if you're concerned about how a statistic was being communicated or how a public figure was using them. Now, like I said, I've included links on all of these on the screen here, so you can click on them if you want to find out a bit more about it. And we would love to hear from you on anything to do with this, anything to do with our research. So thank you. And I'm going to pass back to Rich now.
Yeah, so questions and answers. This is your chance. You've heard from us. But as an audience, if you've got any questions, do you know, ask about UPEN, about ARIs, about the OSR and their ARIs, or about Carl's experience,